I actually had there's um, an article on my website which was my big revelation on this. I was raised progressive, sort of left socialist kind of consciousness, uh, and I was invited to a session that had was sort of equally divided between lefties and righties, and some people who were kind of just process people, and I was kind of a process person, lefty. And they got some, some pretty good left people there. They got some really top. The person who organized it was a former uh, right-wing militarist uh, a politician who had become a process person. Uh, and the people they'd invited were major figures in the American conservative movement, who I researched before I went there. I went, oh my God, what am I getting involved in? They were such horrible sense of who these people were when I read about them. And then I met them, and it wasn't just that they were just people. It was that there was a difference between their presence in the public sphere and their presence person to person. And even when we talked politics, we discovered all sorts of common ground and all sorts of, why is this even a political issue? This is so obvious. It was revelatory, and I suddenly felt that my progressive stance, the coherence that I carried about the progressive worldview and policy options and all the rest, was actually a trap. It was preventing me from being able to see these other people as real people who I could potentially work with. So it was a divide. The sense of being divided and conquered was very vivid to me. And I have since, I have progressive responses in my bones, but I have tried very hard to set them aside in all situations where it's relevant and try to see the other people as people and as potential allies in finding common ground and seeking where we want to go. So that personal experience had a great shaping influence on my own thinking about this. And then reading about the Public Conversation Project's work, where one of the several things they did in their work with people who were activists against abortion and people who were activists defending women's rights to abortion, which is what they call pro-life and pro-choice. And the realization through the process that they did that the adversarial majoritarian systems that we have set up, where there's usually things boil down to two sides. You have to be pro or con, this or that, or you have to be supportive of this candidate against that candidate. And that framing means that you need to make alliance with people who you wouldn't necessarily join up with, because and speak out messages that you don't totally agree with, because in order to be effective, you have to build the movements to get a 51% majority in order to win, in order to get anything done. And that systemic dynamic makes it seem like people are on two different sides, when in fact, as in the Public Conversation Project, they found many of the people who were pro-life, that is anti-abortion, did consider there were times when abortion was going to be necessary, and people who were pro-choice were thinking there are some times when it didn't make sense. It was not right for women to have abortions or to push abortions. They all could agree that every child should be a wanted child. So there was lots of common ground that could be worked on. And as activists after these meetings, they started to do their activism in more nuanced ways to actually disown their most extreme people in order to relate to each other and keep the issues in being discussed in sensible ways in the public. So that's why I say it's a compelling illusion. And the feedback loops, once you get into like a political argument, you can feel your nuances begin to disappear, and you need to push harder because otherwise you'll lose. Just in families and in friendships, the dynamics of polarization make it, it makes you more invested in pushing your own idea, which supports the dynamics of polarization. And of course, political leaders and other kinds of leaders will use polarization, to divide and conquer, and they'll pull people over to my side to support me. Goes on all the time in the political realm, making extreme statements, extreme imagery, whatever, and not giving space for the nuances and for unique movement, viewpoints, and for the complexity of virtually every issue is very complex. So my suggestion in this particular pattern is to have show polarized people. The McLean's magazine that I talk about shows people who are very different from each other. They actually talked together for 2.5 days and actually came up with plans to how to make Canada a better place. So if you can make that really vividly present, have people as a book of a strong conservative and a strong progressive who talked for a couple of years trying to understand where each other were really at. And they ended up making a book out of their conversations, just to show how people who are very different can actually talk in sensible ways. And sometimes they shift, sometimes they don't, but they both gain more understanding and respect for each other as they see what's gone into the feelings and perspectives that each other hold. And my own favorite approach is using random selection to move beyond the whole framing of polarization. Instead of getting a left person and a right person talking, let's just be people and help them identify as citizens who are trying to figure out their country or their community's needs and how to satisfy them. And that changes the way they think about themselves too. They're framed at the beginning as part of a team rather than as people who are on two different teams. And then use processes that bring out how unique and complex their thinking is, and what is the role of, what are the gifts and limitations of each person's perspective, and how does it fit into the big picture that they're trying to put together, and the new picture they're trying to paint together of new options and possibilities. So yeah. And I realize I mentioned McLean's, so that should be added to the list. Dynamic Facilitation, of course, Public Conversations Project that talked about polarity management. It's just a fascinating, it's saying that many principal polarities, like the one I saw worked with was equality and freedom. That the more freedom you bring into a system, the more people's differences begin to magnify in the social system, the economy, the political world, whatever, and the differences start to show up, and those differences start to create inequalities, and then the inequalities get to a point where enough people go, wait a minute, this is not good to have us. So so the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, or whatever. Certain people are more powerful in the system, of men, women, whatever, and so there's a backlash to that, and it pulls towards more equality. And as you legislate equality and make inequality bad, you start to clamp down on people's freedom. And so there's a natural, this is not a problem you can solve. You can't ever get the extreme one way or another. There's always resistance once it starts getting too far. So this is defined not as a problem, but a dilemma. And a dilemma is something that you can't solve because it's intrinsic intrinsic dynamic tension between them. So polarity management is a way of recognizing that, studying its dynamics, and being able to maintain more of a balance that keeps you from going into dysfunctional extremes.